We're beginning a new study today. This is Keegan Wilson. My name is Rex Dutton. If you're new to us, God bless you for coming in. The new study is, Lord willing, a 9-week study on the Sermon on the Mount, and it's about the good life and how to have the good life. So we're going to break the Sermon on the Mount down in several different parts. The first part we're going to look at is the blessed life, how we as a Christian live literally a good life. A lot of people seem to think that live like a Christian or a believer is really not that great, but we believe it's the best life possible. And
there's also the other side where people think that it's the solution to everything, and then that it's easy. I think Christianity is easy to live. So there's also that side of the coin. It's not always easy, as we'll see as we discuss some of these ideas.
So it's not easy for you to be a Christian? Is this
not
an
always.
Admission?
What?
Is this an admission on your part? No, it's not easy. It's not always easy. And it's hard at times to be that. And this really does point that out. So.
Before we jump in, just to paint the scene, this is the Sermon on the Mount. So this is really early days of Jesus' teachings. So possibly 3.5 years before his death. And it's just interesting that he launches from this platform of real goodness.
Right. Well, most scholars believe that this may not have been just one sermon, but a series of sermons that are spoken in several different places. And because there's really so much in this, we're taking 9 weeks to cover it. So it's likely, a series of lessons he gave. And so we're breaking it down in bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
So, it's a sermon, but it's also a grouping of lessons. And this particular part is about how you can know that you're living a blessed life, which, if you want to have a good life, I think you want to be living a blessed life. I think it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So
how can you live a blessed life, Keegan?
Well, good example.
Oh, really? Okay.
No. Well, the best thing that I've found and through my studies is, I think the equation is joy. Joy. Jesus first, yourself last, and others in between. And when you truly find that, that's the best life I can see. It ties in with the two greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God, and then love one another. And I see it replicating in the Beatitudes of God first and each other, second. So I think the blessed life comes down to something as simple as that.
That's good. Why don't we dig in?
Okay.
The first beatitude that's mentioned after they get up on the mountain and they sit down is in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 5. So we're looking in Matthew chapter 5 if you want to follow along. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So what do you think it is to be poor in spirit, King?
Well, I'm upset they didn't say poor financially, because then I would be doing really well.
But what is poor in spirit?
Poor in spirit, it's an interesting idea because I guess when we're really struggling, when we're really down, when we're poor in spirit, I have to come to a realization that there's nothing I can do. I can't pay my way out of this scenario we're in. I can't exchange anything for, to be saved. It's basically, I realize that I'm a sinner and I'm stuck. I can't do anything about it. I need someone to come down and rescue me.
Well, it's interesting, even the way it says this. It's a Hebraism. They say the word blessed here. It's an expression where it kind of goes, it's like an exclamation. Oh, the blessedness of. And so Jesus isn't just saying this is a good place to be or a happy place to be. This is a great place to be. This is a fabulous place. And as a Christian, we should be saying, oh, the joy of being a Christian. Oh, the joy of having Christ. Because, oh, the joy of being poor in spirit. There's a couple of different words that's used for poor in the scriptures. One doesn't mean destitute. It means to just not really be that rich. It means just to earn a living day by day. But that's not the word that's used here. The word that's used here means virtually crouching in poverty. It means literally beaten down to your knees. You just don't have anything. You've got nothing. So he's talking about spiritually speaking, obviously, and that's what you just said a moment ago. The point is that if you truly are going to be blessed in the kingdom, it's a realization that I've got nothing to add to this. If I'm right with God, I can't do this. I've got nothing I can put on the table. I'm utterly helpless to fix my problem with God. And once I recognize that, then I have the kingdom.
Yeah.
If I can't recognize that, then I'm always the one trying to make the kingdom. I'm the one trying to do everything.
And that comes back to our discussion previously, where we were saying that we set up such a legalistic view in our head that we rule ourselves out of heaven, and we can't get there. And that's not what Jesus is saying here. I mean, it's interesting that the Beatitudes, the root meaning is from the Latin, which means happiness. The very first one he's talking about poor in spirit. True happiness is finding that problem that we have, and
Right.
and realizing that.
And it's way more than just I'm kind of happy things are going well. It's like wow.
Yeah.
So it's a wow. And if you recognize that you're saved by the grace of God, and you really could not add to it, you really could not fix it. That is a wow.
But then there is a fix.
Yeah, there is a
It's
fix.
not that I can do it, but when I realize that someone's doing it for me,
Right.
wow,
That is a wow.
That is the excitement that he's
And
talking about.
it's a true blessed life once you get there. Until you get there, though, it can be rather actually so restrictive that you can be miserable and be a person that claims to be a person of faith. But once you get to this point where you're poor in spirit and you know it, then the kingdom's yours.
Yeah.
It really is. The second beatitude we want to look at is in verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. What's your understanding of that?
Well, we know the Greek, it means it's mourning the dead. So it's not just like, oh, I'm sad. This is a real deep sorrow or mourning, a bitterness.
Right.
Like a sour taste in your mouth. Like really, I'm thinking of Naomi, that bitterness. And so
That's good.
we are, and to take Naomi's story, at some point she is comforted, right? So it seems to be time that comforts.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. And I liked what we read about what the Arabs say about all sunshine makes a desert. So it may seem wrong for us to be talking about the bitterness or the sadness or the passion of death and how that would actually give you the good life or the blessed life. How could that be? How could a really, really terrible moment do that? What's your answer to that?
Yeah. Because I've struggled with a lot of this stuff. I mean, you know me, and those who know me, I've had a bit of an interesting time in my life. But the lessons I learned from it and the struggles I've been through and the mourning that I've gone through is that, yes, it's been miserable, but I feel like I'm stronger than ever before. And now when I seem to come across similar scenarios, I deal with it a lot better. And one of the sayings that I leaned on for a long time is, bitter is the death of dreams, until soon they're few and far between the lines of age. And I do see hope in, as time goes by, we are comforted in a weird way.
Did you write that?
No. I mean, yes. I know. But it's really good, and it really helped me through some tough times. That deep struggle that I had, I see God working. So I do see how he comforts us. It takes time, though.
Right. There's different kinds of sorrow.
Sure, yeah.
But the bitterest of all, I suppose, is the loss of a loved one. And that's the deepest. And here he's probably talking about a couple of things. One is having that sorrow for the sufferings of the world, a grief for their suffering, and also a sorrow over our own sinfulness and the sins of the world. So, I mean, I don't think this is a sorrow for me so much as it is a sorrow for all. I mean, I think you really only begin to experience the blessed life when you kind of get out of yourself.
Okay, and yes, because I'm starting to see a pattern emerge here, and I'll talk about that when we get to the end.
So I'm thinking it's not just about me, my sin, or me and my sorrow, but is a grief that I feel for the loss of everyone that's facing. Like we're in the middle of this thing now, this COVID thing, and in the grief, we should feel a grief for all that suffered, and I think that should be the case always. And I think if you feel that, you will probably do stuff to help. But more than that, I think if you feel the grief over not just your sin, but the sins of the world, and not just your grief, but the grief of the world, and not just your sorrow, but the sorrow of the world, I think God will step in and say, now you're feeling like I feel. Because God's not up there going, boy, let's just see how they scream out today, how they'll be in grief, and how let's watch those tears roll down. It'll be so much fun. That's not God.
That's not God at all.
No.
But it's a good point, because the pattern I'm seeing, and because we've obviously been through this already, but there's a pattern of situational awareness, of thinking outward, seeing the world for what it is, what has truly happened, the fall of man, the sin that still corrupts mankind today, and realizing that we need God,
right,
and crying out to Him,
right,
and essentially that's when things change. Is when we come to that realization. We're in spirit. We realize we're mourning. We're realizing how bad it is. We're crying out to God, right. And I'm starting to see this pattern emerge.
What's the next
one?
We'll
see it as we go. So the next one is, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. What does it mean by meek? Because some people often think that's like a spineless, subservient type idea. I think they translate it to weak rather than meek. So explain the difference.
Well, apparently in the Greek language, this particular word has a couple of different meanings. So the first meaning is that it's kind of an ethical individual who tries to do the right thing. But it really comes from the idea of what they use to describe an animal. That a meek animal was an animal that was had learned and had been trained and was under control. So if you have a dog, let's say, and you tell him to sit and he sits, and you say heel and he walks beside you, that's a meek animal. If you have a horse that you can ride and he doesn't hurt you, he's not dangerous to you. Now clearly a horse, even a meek horse, is not a weak horse. A horse is, I mean, that's where we get the word horsepower from, right? I mean, it can, if he kicks you and you survive, you're actually blessed, because there have been many a person in the history of horses and men that died from a horse kick. And there have been many a person wounded terribly by a horse or a cow. But if you have a horse that is well trained, he wouldn't dare kick you intentionally. He's a meek horse. And so he means you no harm. He means to work with you, to serve with you, to plow, whatever it is. And so don't interpret meekness as weakness or spineless or incapable of fighting for itself.
It sounds more like obedience,
cooperative.
Self-control.
Self-control. That's a good word for it. Yes, very much so. Self-control and not going crazy. It seems to me, I just keep seeing so much of this today. People melting down. It's a term I keep hearing. Haven't you heard it? I mean, it's a lot of people on the internet. Oh, well, they're melting down. That person melted down. And I'm like, we're not supposed to melt down. We're really supposed to maintain and get through things. And I read the story of Alexander the Great, who apparently, according to the story, in a fit of temper while he was drunk, picked up a spear, threw it at his best friend, killed him. That's not me.
That's how you win an argument, though.
He made his point, but the thing is that
even he couldn't handle that one.
The blessed man is the man who has all of his nature truly under control.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best life. I mean, then really it is, because if you're going to be a good husband, you're going to be a good wife. You can't just fly off the handle.
Yeah, 100%.
You're not going to. If you deal with your children that way, they'll take your kids away from you.
Yeah,
and probably should. I mean, you have to learn this, and this is the path to the blessed life. To be a meek person who can control itself, and you end up getting everything in this world that's worth anything. If you can learn to control yourself, that's the reason you inherit the earth. There may be a greater meaning of that in the spiritual sense, because that particular inherit the earth is something we can maybe talk about another time. But fundamentally, it means to get the best of this world.
There's always layers of wisdom and information that God has. So it's exciting to see how this plays out when we see Jesus again.
Absolutely.
It's going to be like, oh,
there may be
there's more depth to
there
that.
There may be several layers to this.
Oh, yeah.
Then verse 6.
Right, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. I love this one, because hunger and thirsting for righteousness, it once again, we're looking outward, we're seeing the world for what it is, and we want it to be better. We're starting to think more along the lines of how God's thinking. We want it to be more righteous. We want to see people thriving and doing well and getting along, and we thirst for that, right?
Imagine how God must want it.
Oh, way more than what I want. And that's just incredible.
And yet he's patient with us at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, it uses the word hunger and thirst. And in that day, I mean, we really don't know it. I've never really been hungry. I mean, you can look at me and tell I haven't been hungry in a while. But I mean, I've never been that hungry. I mean, seriously. I mean, I've fasted. You know, I've been a few days without food. I know what it is to be that kind of hungry, but that's not the hunger that they knew. They lived right on the edge of poverty their entire life. They literally were slightly hungry all the time, and never quite, they didn't eat sumptuous meals. The average man, I mean, he ate what was in front of him and stayed kind of thin, because there really wasn't that much. And you had to be rich to be heavy. It just wasn't possible. People couldn't do it. They didn't have the money to do it. So they stayed hungry.
Well, growing up in Africa, I got to see some terrible things. I also traveled to India, and I saw some real hunger and, real poverty. And I'm trying to think like how that would feel. And the only thing that's on your mind is possibly food and thirsting.
It's hard to think about anything else. And
so I guess that's what he's saying, is that we get to that stage where that's all that's on our mind. We just want to see righteousness. We want to see good.
You make a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I know that when a lot of people don't want to fast, okay, because for about the first 3 days or 4 days, all you think about is food. You don't think about praying. Everybody's saying, well, I want to fast and pray. And so what you really do is fast and think about food. But so about but what I found was you have to get to like the third or fourth day. About the third or fourth day, you get really woozy, and you turn your head too quick. You almost get drunk. But after the third or fourth day, the hunger starts going away. Yeah, and then all you can think about is prayer, and you start seeing things in a totally different way. And it really affects you spiritually. It really does. But you got to get to like the fourth or fifth day before it really begins to do that.
I did a series of fasting, but what I found was, yes, you're hungry, but the way I distracted myself with that was just reading Bible and praying. Right. And it really shifted my focus. When you go to day 3, day 4, I didn't worry about food anymore.
Exactly.
You're just reading, and you're so much closer to God, and it's almost like you can. I won't say I was hearing Him, but maybe. But it's almost like you can, and you start to see things in a different light. And it's when you've just got your mind so focused on that. You will be satisfied.
And what he's saying is, you need to have that kind of intensity, that kind of focus on righteousness. If you could hunger for righteousness like that it's a constant thinking. What am I going to do now? I need to do this. I need to be more righteous. and that kind of intensity, then you'll be filled. You will be a better person.
Which is interesting because I see sin as is that hole that we all feel that that we're trying to fill it up, and we look to things like drugs and alcohol and trying to ease that discomfort or that loneliness or whatever someone might be going through. But that never works. Ultimately, that's just a short-term solution that leads to a worse path. Worser? That's not the right word, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Worser.
Worserist. But this is talking about filling ourselves with righteousness, and it seems to work because he says, you will be satisfied.
And it fills that hole. And in fact, Jesus would go into John 4 and further that you become like a well yourself springing up. So if you really hunger and thirst for righteousness, not only do you end up being satisfied, but you literally become like a source of righteousness for other people, like a well springing up. The Spirit moving through you encourages other people to be righteous. So it's the whole thing. But it is a blessed life. All right, verse 7.
Okay, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. This is an interesting one.
Yeah, it's maybe a hard one to swallow because it basically means that you're going to be happiest if you learn to forgive pretty much everything that's ever done wrong towards you. And
how do you do that when someone's stolen from you?
Right, exactly. So how do you do that? Well, the Greek word here kind of means what we mean in English, but it comes from a Hebrew word, and that word it's actually hard to translate that word. I can't even pronounce it. Maybe you can.
Say it.
What?
You said.
I don't know how to do it. You've studied Hebrew probably.
I'm just gonna guess.
It starts, it's Checed, however you pronounce that.
Chuck it. I don't know.
Yeah, sounds right. Chuck it, something like that. Anyway, it means more than to sympathize with people. It or even to empathize. It literally carries with it the idea of getting inside of another person's skin to think the way they think, to see the way they see, to hear the way they hear, to feel what they feel, to understand what they're understanding. There's an old saying that goes this way: to know a man is to forgive him. If you really know what a man's going through, if you really knew what was happening inside that individual, likely you wouldn't be saying, how could he do that? You'd be going, oh, I know why he did it.
Well, that's it. I often think of a drunkard where we're so quick to go, oh, he got drunk, he sinned, that's really bad. But we don't know that he's just lost his job. There's a series of events. So maybe he got out of bed the wrong side of bed. He stubbed his toe. He was angry. He goes to work. He said something bad, and it slowly escalates. So he loses his job. He loses his family, and then he goes and gets drunk. We only see that sin portion, and we judge someone.
I will say, if he just stubbed his toe and he's drunk, that's
what I mean.
But
there's a series of events that's occurring in someone's life that we don't see. And luckily, God sees that, and that's why I love that God is the just judge. But we don't see that stuff, and we're so quick to judge someone. So
I think it's because we're all we really are. We kind of focus on our belly button. We really focus on our own issues, and we're so consumed with our own issues, we can't actually think about what it might be like to be the other person.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be you, Keegan. I mean, really, seriously. I mean, you're from Australia, you were raised in Africa, and now you're here, and you're engaged to be married, apparently. And she likes you.
Apparently.
I mean, those things. I mean, it's been so long ago, I don't even remember that stuff. But I mean, it's hard. We don't tend to see, well, what must it be like?
Yeah. What
must it be like to be in that situation? And so as a result, when somebody offends us in that situation, I haven't got time to feel sorry for them. I haven't got time to see it from their viewpoint. All I've got a time for is to tell them what's for because they offended me.
Yeah.
And yet you say, well, are we to forgive everything and to let everything go? Well, we really should, because we really are. If we saw it from their perspective, we probably would. We just tend to see it from our perspective. But if we could see it from their perspective, you say, well, who would do that?
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus, God became a man, right?
And Hebrews 4:15 says.
What does it say?
Okay. And then we have a Savior who can empathize with us.
Okay. Okay, so basically he sees it from our eyes. He literally.
Yeah.
He is inside our flesh.
Yeah.
And he hears it from our ears. He understands it with our heart. So you can't say that God doesn't feel mercy for us, because he is the epitome of mercy in that text. And if you show mercy, what happens?
Receive mercy.
You receive mercy. And I want mercy, don't you?
Oh, yes.
So on the day. What about verse 8?
Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So, pure in heart, what does that mean?
It's a good question. To be pure, the word here has several meanings. It can mean clothes that have been washed. It can mean grain that has been winnowed. It no longer has the chaff around it. But it can mean milk or wine or something like that, that something got into it and polluted it. Yeah. And that's the primary meaning of it. And that's the reason that it meant to have an unmixed drink or an unadulterated or unalloyed substance. So it's not got something else in it. If it's salt, it's pure salt. If it's flour, it's pure flour. If it's water, it's pure water. That kind of thing. And so literally to be pure in heart is to have unmixed motives, which is really hard to do.
Because how do you just have righteousness all the time?
Well, how do you want to do the right thing for only right motives? The tendency is that we do right things for the pleasing God, but we also do it sometimes so that people say, "Oh, Keegan, that was so good, Keegan. You really did a great job in that good life lesson." Right?
Yeah. And you're right. We are mixing our own egos in there and our own pride. And so if we're not constantly reading our scriptures and being with God, it's very easy to put ourselves in.
Make long prayer.
Yeah.
You know, that so that everybody would think I'm righteous. I do my alms in public so that I'll be seen. I make long the hem on my garment. Enlarge the phylactery on my head.
Look at me, look how good I am.
Right, look at all I've done.
And
it's not enough for me to just have a phylactery on my head, because Jesus wore them apparently.
Yeah.
But I must get a really big one.
Yeah.
That cost a lot of, and by the way, they're expensive. They're like $500 for a little one. Yeah, I tried to buy one time. I'm like, whoa! I didn't know that a piece of leather would cost that much money. But it's in the little one's $500. You get the other ones, they're $1,000.
But the question I want to go, the scenario I want to go down is, I see this with preachers. I see preachers that fight each other.
Yes. And
fight for the pulpit. It fascinates me. It's bizarre to me that we all have the same goal, but yet we somehow want to one-up each other. And I think that's pride coming.
But you can always tell it. I mean, in yourself. How many times have I heard preachers talk about this? Go to like a lectureship where there's preachers preaching and you're listening to it. I've often heard people come out and say, "Well, why didn't he use this verse? Or why didn't he preach it from that angle?" Yeah. Because so often preachers are sitting there saying, if I'd have taught it, I'd have taught it better than he did.
Yeah, and there's that pride. And you got a good scenario with John Bunyan, who said he was once told by someone that he had preached well that day, and he answered sadly, "The devil already told me that as I was coming down the pulpit steps."
Yeah, that's that inner motive that's not always pure. So if we're going to be pure, we've got to try to have pure motives and not mix our motives. And it goes with truth too. Yeah. We try not to shade the truth. So it needs to be the pure truth, not mixed with something that's not true. So it's a lot of those things.
All right. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Peacemakers?
Well, the word that's Greek comes from the word shalom. And shalom is an interesting word because it doesn't just mean, I hope you don't have any bad in your life. It means I hope you have the best good in your life. Yeah. So if we're peacemakers, we're not just not trying not to have a fight. We're trying to make the world a better place for the people involved. So it's not just a peace lover kind of thing, because a lot of people are peace lovers and not willing to do anything to produce peace. It's actually hard to get two people to come together, but to get two people to come together where not only are they not wanting to fight, but they're actually wanting to be good to each other. Yeah. That's a peacemaker. That
still means they're going to have disagreements and arguments, but their intention.
Well, I'm not talking about marriage, but yes. So but fundamentally, yes, that's the idea that they are doing good things for each other, more than just not fighting, if you will.
Fair enough.
Okay, and the last one.
So the last one: blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so men persecuted the prophets who were before you.
You ought to feel good the way I pick on you.
Yes, apparently. You keep telling me. But this is such an interesting scripture to me, because a lot of us, we interpret peacemaker as we've got to make sure everyone's happy, but at the same time we're going to be persecuted.
Right.
So at first glance it looks like a contradiction, but we know that that's not exactly what peacemaker means.
Right.
And so now when we look at that, at some point in my life, I have to take a stand.
Sure. Well, and
I'm going to be persecuted for it.
Right.
Jesus tells me it's going to happen.
Right. And it's going to happen in a lot of different ways. It can happen socially. It can happen politically. It can happen in church with people that you respect. It can happen in so many different venues spiritually. And if you've never had anybody say anything bad about you for trying to do the right thing, then you need to get there.
Yeah.
Because the real happiness, I know this is going to sound strange, but there's real happiness in doing the right thing and knowing it's the right thing and taking a stand for something that's good and wholesome. It's really a good place to be when someone says something ugly about you for doing it.
Yeah. And Matthew 10:22, you'll be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And so it's not always going to be easy, but I'm going to find happiness in it. But I've got to take a stand for the truth. And honestly, if anyone knows me, the amount of information I consume or research that I do, I get to the point where I hear what Peter's saying. Where else am I going to go?
Right.
I've looked at everything else and nothing solves this problem other than Jesus. And so I have to take a stand for what I believe to be true and what I'm seeing to be true. And I'm going to be persecuted for it.
Well, it probably won't be physical. I mean, even the Hebrew writer said you haven't yet resisted to blood, Hebrews 12. So, I mean, most people, even in that day, had not been hurt physically.
Yeah.
It's usually insult. I mean, Christian was probably an insulting term because they made up these words mocking them. So, I mean, words that you are used to hurt people, and I mean, the shouting, whatever, but they're usually insults. People mock you. People will, even your own family might say, and you call yourself a Christian.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the reasons I think it's better to say I'm a disciple of Christ or I'm a student of Christ than it is to use the word Christian, because the way people tend to turn on you with that. But you have to be willing to be a witness for the Lord and to live for Him first and to die for Him if need be. If you don't, you're not really living the blessed life. The real blessed life is when you live at such a level of commitment that you're worthy of somebody saying something ugly about you.
Yeah.
Or doing something ugly to you.
And our human nature is most of us want to just please everybody and we want people to like us. And that's not always going to be the case. We have to take a stand for Christ.
Yeah.
That's tough.
I like the idea of Polycarp. He died when he was like 86 years old. And he said, one of the last things he said, that he was thankful that God had been so gracious that he thought him worthy of dying that day. What a comment, that God would think me worthy of being insulted. So that carries the idea. And so you know you're on the right track when you're worthy of being insulted for the cause of Christ, or mocked, or whatever the word is. So don't get discouraged.
Yeah,
These are all good things. This is the blessed life, because the good life, the really good life, is when you know you're actually doing these good things. That's the good life.
When you feel fulfilled and at ease with who you are.
Well, you're doing good things. You're poor in spirit, and you are willing to mourn for the loss of things, and you're meek. You hunger and thirst for righteousness. You're merciful. You're pure. You're a peacemaker, and then so that's the good life. It sounds like it's not the good life. Why is that the case?
Yeah, it's one of those, what do we call them again, paradoxes, where we see that as a bad thing, but ultimately it works out for our good.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we're going to be talking about the good life. These are some of the things that are essential to a blessed life, and we want you to have a blessed life. I mean, that's what I want. Don't you want that?
Absolutely, yeah. And like Christ says, take up your cross and follow me. This is essentially how we're going to find a good life, a happy life. Right. And
so this is his sermon to us all.
All right, I think we should stop there. We've gone a little bit over time, so if you're still with us, you've done well. We'll see you next week for the bright life. And is it just the bright life next week?
Yep, just the bright life.
Just the bright life.
Just
Thanks.
The bright. Yeah.
See you, bye.